The pendulum has kinda swung both ways with Force Awakens, hasn't it? Upon the release, everyone just had their faces exploding with fanboy energy, and then after all of that hype died down, some people started to say that it was actually worse than the prequel movies, and the argument continues to rage on the internet to this very day. Is The Force Awakens just a straight up remake of A New Hope? Or are the similarities due to it being more in tune with the spirit of the original trilogy and following the Star Wars formula? Well, this isn't going to be just another video of some YouTube loudmouth talking about their opinion as if that's the only one that matters, because I already do that in my other videos. Here, we're going to look at this a little bit differently. Is there a way that we can find out if Force Awakens actually does class as a remake that's independent of anyone's opinions? Actually, yes there is. Okay, let's say that one musician accuses another musician of ripping off one of their songs and decides to sue. That kind of stuff actually happens all the time. Well, how does a court actually determine whether one song is a copy of another song? Believe it or not, there is a certain criteria that they use to determine that, which we can apply here with Force Awakens and A New Hope. If George Lucas were to sue Jar Jar Abrams for plagiarizing his script from A New Hope, would he win? Let's find out. Now, to prove that one song is a copy of another song, you need to prove something that's known as substantial similarity. There are a few different ways that they try to prove substantial similarity, the first of which is known as the ordinary observer test. And this is if you played the two disputed songs back to back to an ordinary person, would they be able to tell that they sounded very similar? And considering the sheer number of people online who are pointing out all the similarities between these two movies, I think it's safe to say that The Force Awakens fails the ordinary observer test. But here's where it gets really interesting. Now, a song is made up of composition, that being the actual notes that are written on the page, and sound recording, that being the way that it's actually performed. Very similar to how a movie is made up of the script and of the way that the movie is filmed. So let's look at the composition of The Force Awakens, the actual plot in comparison to A New Hope. To do this, I rewatched A New Hope and I wrote down every single event that happens in the order that it happens. And then I went and I did exactly the same thing with Force Awakens and compared those two lists together, and the results are shocking. Shocking! The similarities go so much further than I think anyone actually expected. Not only does virtually every single thing that happens in A New Hope also happen in Force Awakens, but the order that they happen in is almost identical. And it's not just the bigger stuff like the whole Death Star Starkiller comparison, but even the minor events are the same. Luke gets seized by the foot by a tentacle monster while he's in the trash compactor. Finn gets seized by the foot by a tentacle monster while he's on Han's ship. Luke initially refuses his destiny and tells Obi-Wan he can't help him. Rey initially refuses her destiny and tells Maz Kanata she's not going to take the lightsaber. In the end, it works out that 93% of the events of A New Hope are repeated in The Force Awakens. In fact, the only things that don't get recycled is Luke's parents dying. That doesn't happen to Rey. Tarkin refusing to leave the Death Star. We never have a scene of Hux saying he's not going to leave the Starkiller base. And when R2-D2 gets shot in the head during the Death Star run, BB-8 never gets hurt in the final space battle in Force Awakens. Those are the only three things that are not repeated. But this isn't necessarily as grim as it might seem, because while 93% of A New Hope is repeated in Force Awakens, not all of Force Awakens is repeated in A New Hope. There are a few things that it does that doesn't happen in A New Hope. 6 things in total. The hero resists the villain, there's an appeal to redeem the villain has a moment of doubt, the Emperor wants to turn the hero bad, and in the end the hero leaves to go search for a Jedi Master to teach them. Those things don't happen in A New Hope, but you will no doubt notice that those things do happen in Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. So the only things that Force Awakens doesn't directly copy from A New Hope are copied from the other movies anyway. When it comes right down to it, there is only one thing that The Force Awakens does that isn't ripped off. Finn's story. That's it. His story is the only really fresh element that we haven't directly seen before. We haven't seen his story before. We haven't seen a character quite like him before. If he were the main character of this movie, then perhaps it would be seen in a different light, but he isn't. Skywalker 2.0 is. But apart from Finn, the biggest difference in the films is not the events that actually happen, but the order in which the events are put. In A New Hope, Luke finds his mentor, receives his lightsaber, and learns a bit about the Force relatively early on in the movie, and then later on, he escapes from the Death Star. In Force Awakens, finding the mentor, getting the lightsaber, learning a bit about the Force, that stuff happens later, and escaping the villain's base happens at the beginning with Finn and Poe. So they basically just took the beginning and the middle and just swapped them around, as well as throw in a few elements from Empire and Return of the Jedi into the ending. In the end, Force Awakens is 89% identical to A New Hope, and the majority of that other 11% is just stuff that's taken from the other films anyway. So in terms of composition, the actual notes written on the page, as it were, I don't think any jury could possibly say that Force Awakens is not a copy of A New Hope. But hold on a second, is repeating those things really ripping off the other movies, or is it just a result of their following the Star Wars formula? After all, Star Wars, there's certain things you need to do, right? Well, let's explore that in the next 2 points. Composition is far from being the whole story when it comes to a song. The sound recording is every bit as important. In fact, how a song is recorded and put together can change the way that the song sounds dramatically, even if the notes written on the page are almost identical. And the same can be said for a movie. Armageddon and Deep Impact, in terms of plot, are basically the same. They're both about a giant meteor that's coming to destroy Earth, and it's all about our efforts to try and prevent that. So the composition or the plot are basically the same, but the sound recording or the way the movie is filmed makes them dramatically different films. One is a dumb Michael Bay action movie starring Bruce Willis and Ben Affleck, while the other is more of a thought-provoking drama starring Morgan Freeman as the president. They have the same plot but are totally different because of how they're put together. So is Force Awakens put together differently than A New Hope? Well, there's a whole ton of iconic imagery in the original Star Wars movie, but at no point do we see Jar Jar Abrams trying to copy those images. He doesn't try to copy the Star Destroyer flying over the camera in the opening sequence that we all know so well. He doesn't try to recreate the framing of the Obi-Wan and Vader fight. And the movie overall has a very different energy running throughout it, while it still fits into the Star Wars universe. Jar Jar Abrams' humor and his style is what brings the film to life. He also adds in many iconic imagery of his own, unique to his particular style. While Kylo Ren is essentially filling the Darth Vader role, he's not a straight up clone of that character either. He still stands on his own 2 feet with his own personality. Even the returning characters, while they are still retaining the character that makes them who they are, they still do feel changed and different. Regardless of the similarities in the plot, the style of the film is taken from nothing but itself. So in terms of sound recording or the way that Force Awakens is put together, yes, it easily gets a pass in this regard. However, there are different genres of music out there, and all songs within a certain genre have similarities to them, don't they? All country music has kind of depressing themes, all rap has like heavy bass to it, and these types of similarities in copyright law is covered by an expression called scenes à faire. I am probably pronouncing that wrong, it's a French expression, but it basically means scenes that must be done. It's an expression referring to film which suits our purposes perfectly. When a movie set in the Wild West has a scene of a gunslinger walking into a bar, all the music stops and everyone turns around and looks at the guy, that's not a rip-off of other westerns that have done that, because that's a scene that must be done in a western. A superhero saving a baby from a burning building, that isn't stealing from other superhero movies that have done that, it's just a staple of the genre. Likewise with Star Wars, there's also a lot of scenes that must be done. A lightsaber duel, a big space battle, an evil empire. These things don't make Force Awakens a remake, they just make it part of the Star Wars brand. And this was Chris Stuckman's basic defense for Force Awakens in the video that he made, which I'll link here if you haven't seen it yet. So the point is that all of these types of things get a pass in Force Awakens because they're not a rip-off, they're just things that must be done in a Star Wars movie. But here's where the internet tends to argue this point. How far can this scenes that must be done argument really stretch? Does it cover something like the Starkiller base? Is Force Awakens throwing in another Death Star just something that you always have to do in Star Wars? Or is it just recycling something old due to lack of original ideas? Well, there is one last point that could maybe help to settle this, and it's called diminish. Going back to our analogy of songs being compared, diminish means that if the section of the song that's in dispute is only a small part of the overall song, then it doesn't count as a violation of copyright or of intellectual property theft, because it's just a small part. In the 90s, George Michael made a song called Waiting for the Day, in which at the end of the song, he sung the line, "You can't always get what you want," which was a reference to the Rolling Stones song of the same name. So of course, all the lawyers decided to sue, but since that part they were suing for was literally just the end line in the song, and everything else before it was a completely different song, he was able to claim diminish and he won that case. While on the other hand, when Vanilla Ice hit the big times with Ice Ice Baby, he got sued because of the background beat that he used was exactly the same as the Queen song Under Pressure. Seriously, go listen to that song on YouTube. It's basically Ice Ice Baby. He just lifted that beat directly from there. And since that beat does run throughout the majority of his entire song, he couldn't claim diminish, and he had to pay them a whole bunch of money. So the point is this: claiming that similarities between The Force Awakens and A New Hope are okay because it's just stuff that needs to happen in Star Wars only works if diminish is proven. If it's proven that those similarities are only just a small part of the overall movie, and with 89% of the plot being a direct copy of A New Hope is certainly not a small portion of the movie. So to answer the question proposed at the beginning of this video, if George Lucas were to sue Jar Jar Abrams for plagiarizing his story for A New Hope and making a remake basically, would he win? Yeah, he probably would. In fact, it would probably be a very easy victory for him.
Here comes the money.
But can I just say one last thing? Who cares? Even though Force Awakens very clearly fits into the category where it can be classed as just a remake, who cares? Because remake or not, it's still a huge step up from where the franchise was. And people are going around saying that George Lucas should be brought back on, and they're making petitions to try to bring him on to take control of it again. Are you kidding me? Have people got short memories? Do we not remember the horror of Jar Jar Binks and midichlorians and immaculate conceptions and space taxes and Senate meetings and people saying, "I don't like sand"? Do we really want to go back to all of that? No, I'd take a really, really good quality remake of A New Hope over that any old day. But the whole remake argument is only really one half of the controversy surrounding Force Awakens. The other half is about Rey, and this term that none of us knew what it meant until Max Landers put it on Twitter, Mary Sue. Is Rey really a Mary Sue? Well, that's going to be the next video coming out on the channel. So you can click right here to check it out. If it's not there yet, it will be there in a few days. Or you can also check out this right here. This is a channel called Undeleted Scenes, where it's basically like how it should have ended, but they animate like funny scenes that could be like deleted scenes. And in this particular one, I actually got to voice General Hux as he, Kylo Ren, and Captain Phasma were flying away from the Starkiller base and the whole conversation they had. It's very funny. They're really talented. You should definitely check those guys out. So I am Bandit, this is Bandit Incorporated, and until next time, I will see you guys in the comments. So what happened to you down there? Was the Resistance secretly training a bunch of Jedis and they attacked you all at once?
Not exactly.
Well then, what happened to you?
I kinda lost a fight to that girl we captured. Okay, stop laughing or I'll force choke you both.
Oh,